Hi guys, I'm Big Boy once again. Welcome back to my YouTube channel again. Remember, if it's for the first time you're coming across my video, don't forget to like this video, subscribe and share. Okay guys, in today's clip, I have this clip from an Arab young man who is sending a strong message and a warning message to all the Caribbean leaders and to all, most importantly, African leaders. Kindly have a look at this clip and then you come back for more discussion.
Which is the colonial legacies. And of course, a lot of people say, well, come on, colonialism is over. It's been, several decades since independence, but we have the unfinished business of decolonizing economic structures. So I focus on the economic structures that actually produce the results that we're looking at. So when it comes to the colonial role that was imposed on the African continent, it can be summarized in three basic points. Number one, we're supposed to be the place for cheap raw materials for the industrialized world. We still play that role today. Number two, we were supposed to be the place that consumes technology and industrial output from the global north. We still play that role today. And number three, and most importantly, we're supposed to be the place where obsolete technologies, assembly line manufacturing that is no longer needed in the industrialized world is outsourced to us under the label of development, cooperation, job creation, technical assistance, all of that. But effectively, what it does is that it permanently locks us at the bottom of the global value chain. That was the role we played during colonial times, and unfortunately, that is the role we continue to play today. So colonialism, of course, was not a system for development. It was not designed to achieve sustainable development goals or a just transition or justice or anything. Colonialism was a system of extraction, of abuse. We should not be surprised that the same colonial structures, economic colonial structures that persist today are producing these bad results of malnutrition, of poverty, of socioeconomic exclusion. So that's why in the context of the just transition and the context of decarbonization, we always say we cannot decarbonize a system that hasn't been structurally and economically decolonized yet. And when it comes to kind of the visible manifestation of these problems, the issue of external debt, that is debt denominated in foreign currencies, in dollars and euros. It is a serious problem because it takes a huge amount of fiscal policy space that doesn't allow our governments to invest in the building blocks of development and prosperity, such as basic health and education and infrastructure, because we have to prioritize paying the external debt. But external debt is actually a symptom of deeper structural issues that have colonial roots. Number one, food deficits. Number two, energy deficits. And number three, manufacturing deficits. And I can explain each very briefly so we can understand why these are fundamental. When I say food deficits, according to UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, Africa today imports 85% of its food. 85%. When less than 100 years ago, during colonial times, we used to be the breadbasket for colonial powers. And what happened is that there's a redesign of the system as soon as we gained independence. In 1955, for example, in Europe, at the Treaty of Rome meeting, the Europeans said we have a food security problem for Europe because they were so dependent on Africa. And that introduced a common agricultural policy, which is in place to this day. So what is CAP? It's heavy agricultural subsidies to produce the core crops in Europe, such as corn and wheat and soybean and the core food security items. And of course, it wasn't just Europe that did that. It was the United States, Canada, Australia, the former Soviet Union, which is why Russia and Ukraine today dominate the grain industry. And what it did is that it forced African farmers out of business because they couldn't compete with the subsidized wheat and corn coming from the global north. So we had to redesign our agriculture to specialize in cash crops for exports: coffee, tea, tobacco, bananas, all the complementary items. So today we live in a world where we consume what we don't produce and we produce what we don't consume. And that's why we have real food insecurity on the African continent and the rest of the global south, obviously. So that's the food deficiency. Number two, energy deficiency. When I say energy deficits in Africa, I include our biggest oil exporter on the continent. Nigeria today imports 100% of its gasoline, not by accident, by design. Angola, our second largest oil exporter, imports 80% of its fuel from international markets. So we're constantly denied the technology processing, the technology for drilling, the technology for refining. So we export crude oil, we import refined petrochemicals. You export the cheap stuff, you import the more expensive stuff. So you're always in a deficit situation. And finally, the manufacturing deficits, the fact that the only type of manufacturing base that we were allowed to have is the kind where we have to import the machines, we have to import the fuel to power the factories, we have to import the intermediate components to be assembled with low-cost labor, and we even import the packaging. So we end up with the value-added content of what we export is low value added, what we import is high value added. So you can double, triple, quadruple your exports. You're always locked at the bottom of the value chain. And here's how it's manifested. You have these structural deficits, the most fundamental areas. As you know, no country can function without food, without fuel, without manufacturing. So we have structural trade deficits. And what structural trade deficits do is that they weaken our currencies relative to the dollar, relative to the euro. And with the weaker currency, anything I need to import the next morning, whether it's food or fuel or medicine, you import it at a higher price. So we literally import inflation in the most sensitive areas of the economy, therefore hurting the most vulnerable people in society. And that immediately forces our governments into a defensive position to protect the most vulnerable. So what do? We subsidize food, we subsidize fuel, which makes sense to protect the most vulnerable, but you can't do that for 8 decades. And we ask our central banks to stabilize the exchange rate, to fight inflation. And the way they do it is by using a band-aid solution, which is borrowing more dollars. And that gets the external debt into a vicious cycle that is unsustainable, which means now the government is completely obsessed with prioritizing economic activity that will allow us to earn dollars as quickly as possible so that we service the debt. And we deprioritize economic activity that is actually transformational, that is actually the foundation of development and prosperity. And that is the essence of why we neglect so many of the priorities. And that's why a lot of the fiscal policy space that our governments have is dedicated to servicing the debt, which is by design the colonial architecture that was imposed on us. So that's why we say we can't really achieve the sustainable development goals or a just transition or any of the goals that we want to achieve under a system, an economic system that's still structurally colonized when we have economies that are technically steered from abroad.
Hi guys, welcome back again. I hope you have really heard what this Arab man has said and it's really making sense. So let's hear what Dr. Harikana has to say.
It is actually, I have been saying this for years, that if I could influence the African leaders in any way, shape, or form, they need to boycott attending the United Nations General Assembly. There's nothing there for them. They're just coming there to validate other people's issues. So if Africa was to really speak with one voice, they need to boycott the United Nations General Assembly. There's nothing there for them. They're just wasting taxpayers' money, having hundreds of them coming to the United Nations for what? You know, don't come to the United Nations. Tell the United Nations, if you don't fix this, if we're not members of the UN Security Council, we're not attending UNGA. Plain and simple. But unfortunately, they're not going to do it. You know, Africa needs to have a backbone. Africa needs to have a backbone. I think one of the biggest problems and challenges that we have, I often say, as Black people, not only Black people in Africa, but Black people around the world, we were defeated where it matters the most, which is the mind. I am going to say this honestly and sincerely, and some people may not like it, but it is our reality. We have African governments that have some members of the governments who are on the payrolls of foreign nations. We have Africans who are willing to be influenced, to be bought, to be paid in order to derail not only the continental agenda, but also agendas of their own country's development. You tell me, why is it that we have ministers of finance who come to Washington twice a year to discuss issues to do with funding for Africa, financial issues for Africa? Why haven't they come together and taken a position to truly challenge the World Bank and say, these loans that you continue to make us pay have been paid for gazillion times. They were illegally acquired. I'm encouraging everybody to read the book, Confessions of the Economic Hitman, where they talk about exactly how they would force these countries to accept these humongous loans. It was all a game at the expense of the African people. Our people know that. But why aren't they standing up and pushing back and calling a spade a spade? One, we have some that are on the payrolls of foreign governments, and yet they are in the government themselves. Shame on them. Two, we have some that are just scared of those who don't look like us, again, is part of the legacy of colonization and the legacy of slavery. We have some serious healing to do as Africans when it comes to our minds. No other man on earth in any leadership position would tolerate the abuse the Africans are tolerating, blatant abuse. So our bigger issue is the mind, our inability to fight back, our men standing up and being men like other men around the world. A lot of it has to do with some on an individual basis, greed. Others is just the mind. We're afraid of white people. We don't want to speak up in meetings because we're afraid we'll be labeled. It's the mind. At the end of the day, for me, it is the mind that was defeated. And until the mind is awoken and the mind is fearless and the mind simply says what's right is right, what is wrong, come to the United Nations, challenge the United Nations, go to the World Bank, challenge the World Bank with facts and knowledge of what is really going on. Call these nations out, tell them to stop the abuse, which is blatant. These nations are not trying to hide the abuse. The abuse is blatant. So to the Africans, I say, stand up, have a backbone, speak up. And for those in power, people appointed you into positions so you can represent the people. And to the people, I say to the Africans, if a leader is not representing you well, vote them out. We are sick and tired of being misrepresented by our leadership. Vote them out if they don't represent you well at a community level in your country. Vote them out if they are not representing you well at the world stage. They know the facts. Our people are now empowered. They know the games that are being played by the Western world, by the Eastern world. They are telling their leadership, we don't want it anymore. So we are demanding leadership that's going to defend us, leadership that's going to speak up, leadership that's going to say, do unto us as you want done unto you. Our ask as Africans is a very simple one. We want the world to treat us the way they would want to be treated. And our leaders are our mouthpiece. We expect them to speak up. We expect them to defend us by any means necessary. What we need are leaders that are awoken, fearless, and are ready to defend Africa like they were mandated to do by the people.
Thank you. Well, you've set expectations very high. We'll have to see how that plays out. I want to thank the former ambassador.
I agree with the brother severely. Africa must be at the table. We must be where decisions are being made. We must be in a position to also disagree or agree on global issues. Yes, while I understand the dysfunction among us as Africans at the African Union, and I've always said this, that at this point, we don't have the right leadership at the African Union. And I'm hoping that with the new elections that are coming up in February of next year, we are going to have an African Union chair with a head over their shoulders. Right now, we don't have any leadership at the African Union. Moussa Faki has failed us. He's a puppet of the West. We all know that. So yes, I agree with him on one end that we do need reform at the African Union. The good thing for us is there are elections coming up. Moussa Faki is going to be gone. And our hope is we're going to have a new chairman of the African Union who understands the issues and is going to reform the African Union where it can truly represent the people. That is where we need. We got our own homework to do. But that doesn't mean we should give us an opportunity to be at the table. So to just run off and say, well, we are dysfunctional at the African Union, and therefore we are not going to demand that seat at the United Nations Security Council, that's actually stupid. We need to be there while we continue to reform our African Union, while we continue to work together. And I can tell you, the African leaders, they work together. The issue is, do we have someone at the African Union who can implement and execute the wishes of the African Union? They have a system, even for choosing the chairman of the African Union. It's on a rotational basis. I don't see the African leaders having any problem deciding which two countries are going to be the first ones. They just use the same rotational process. Right. So no, I disagree with that, Ambassador. Seriously, we need to be at the table. But more importantly, I am so glad that Moussa Faki is leaving, and I'm hoping that the next chairman of the African Union, come February, is going to be a Pan-African who's going to stand up, defend Africa, and represent the continent like we must be represented. We demand that, and I'm hoping that we'll get that come February. But it matters in the sense that there needs to be true representation at the United Nations. The United Nations is not about 5 countries. The United Nations is about all countries of the world. As a matter of fact, the United Nations should have undergone reform a long time ago. So the issue is about having an entity like the United Nations that is controlled by 5 countries where the other countries have no voice, where the other countries, the 5 countries can just veto anything they don't like. I mean, it is so unfair. The fact that in 2024 we're still discussing this, it's just crazy. That just goes to underscore how insane our world is. So yes, what you're going to see is the global South coming together. This kind of behavior that is leading to the formation of the BRICS. The global world saying, the global South saying, we have been asking for equity. We've been asking and demanding equality and true representation at the global stage at every level, be it at the United Nations, be it in the financial systems, be it with World Trade Organizations, World Health Organizations. The global South countries are constantly being trampled on. And so it's going to lead to another system that's going to be created where the rest of the world is going to say enough is enough. We're tired of your entities that are not representing us. So to the United Nations and the rest of the Western world, particularly the 5 nations on the Permanent Security Council, they also need to see the writing on the wall and realize that the world is changing. The world is more aware of the geopolitics and what's really going on. And many voices are speaking out as to the wrongs that must be righted. So the sooner they address this issue, the better off the world is going to be. This abusive situation where less developed countries are being taken advantage of and being dictated to, that is not going to continue to work anymore. And the P5 nations must see the writing on the wall and do the right thing, starting with Africa, and then other countries like India, Brazil, they too need to be represented because they are representing millions of people. So you can't just have 1.4 million people in India being voiceless. So yes, after Africa, we must bring India. That's it. That would be my suggestion. And slowly get more countries. Right now, the United Nations, as it stands, it does not represent the world. They're just using other countries to come to the United Nations so they can say, yes, we were there. Africa must have 2 permanent seats at the UN Security Council with full veto power. Nothing less is acceptable. And I do believe that the United Nations, understanding how long this issue has been going on, how long the disrespect of the African continent has been going on, it is shameful that the United Nations would want to continue to blatantly disrespect the Africans by inviting them to the table, but then saying, sorry, you can't eat. You can only watch us play our games. You can watch us enjoy the 10-course meal. What a joke. What an insult. And I do hope that the African leaders are not going to accept it. Africa must be at the table as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and the 2 seats must have veto power, plain and simple, period.
Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel again. I hope you have watched the full clip. You have watched how Dr. Arikana said. You have watched how this Arab man has sent a strong message. And what I can really say that our biggest problem as Black, as African, as Caribbean is that we lack unity, whereby we are being easily controlled. That's our biggest problem. And the major basic problem are our politicians, our so-called leaders. And our biggest problem are our leaders, the politicians, who are so greedy, who are just using citizens and local people for their own benefit, and really look at the past and forget the future. whereby if we concentrate on the future, we can be easily developed. We can be developed so far like other countries. It's really sad to see the richest continent in the world becoming the poorest continent. And why do I say Africa are the richest continent in the world? Because Africa has a lot of resources. Africa has a lot of minerals. Look at a country like Nigeria. In Nigeria, they are the biggest country in all the world that are producing oil. And oil, if your country is producing oil, it means your country, it's so rich. But our biggest problem is like, we really export things at a cheaper price and we import them at an expensive price. What do I mean by saying this? It's like, we are really producing this thing, yes, but we export them at a cheaper price. Look at maybe our countries, those countries that have minerals, those countries that are producing oil. Yeah, guys, we export at low price and import at high price. Look at countries that are maybe producing oil, or those countries that are maybe refining minerals. If your country can't refine minerals or maybe make them at use, whereby its local people can just use them while they are maybe the end product. But what do African people do? They export these good things at low price, and then we go and buy them back. We import them at a high price. Surely, if we continue doing that, where will we go? We can't be developed. So it's really high time African country to be changed. It's really high time black people to have one unity. And these people have started becoming afraid of us because they know we are being educated and we know what is going on. It's high time we no longer be the tail but be the head. So guys, the biggest problem is that we talk to our leaders, the one that we elected them, the one that we voted for them. They stop being greed and just make sure that the local people, the citizen people are getting their right. That's where we will be developed, and we stop this mentality whereby Africa is so poor while it has anything. Africa has everything to make it more richer. And I really love how the Ugandan president did, Dr. Yoweri Museveni. He said that there will be no any mineral that will go out of Uganda without being refined. And that has really made Uganda to develop. It has really made Uganda to build more refinery companies, whereby it has created employment to its local people. And the people are continue to enjoying the work, whereby the president said there will be no any exploitation of any unrefined mineral in Uganda. And the country has really developed. There is other countries whereby the government has hindered them to import like food stuff, like vegetables, like maize, and the government is telling this country to plant this thing, to make the local farmers to plant things, at least they can benefit from themselves. And it has really helped. So I really encourage the leaders to really encourage their local people to stop just being greedy and really support their local people. How can you support your local people? By telling them, this year we won't import any food in our country, so let's make an effort. We plant this thing, at least our country can grow, and that will make and will able to stabilize the economy of the country. And that's how really country develops. Really wonder how these European Western countries are developed, because their government are making use of their own resources. The government, they know how to make this country develop. That's why they're just being richer and Africa is being poor. The black people are being poor. Same to Caribbean. Let's stop this colonial system to these people and let us be one. Remember, if you are one, it's easier. Let us all unite, so that at least, remember, when you unite and you are strong, the bond can never be broken. So it's high time for our leaders to fight for our right. And I really urge our African people, our people from Caribbean, whenever it's time for an election, vote for the right leader. Pray to God to guide you to vote for the right leader, but not for those greedy leaders that will come and seduce you and convince you to vote for them oh, if you vote for me, I will build more roads, I will make the infrastructure of the country to be good, I will build good school, good hospital. But at the end, when we elect them, they go and invest in outside countries. They go and invest. Other leaders go and live in US. Other leaders go and live in Canada. Remember what's happening in Haiti? The gang leader, Jimmy Barbecue, the reason why he is striking and the voice in Haiti, because Jimmy Barbecue said, if we will elect a leader, let the leader be from our country, Haiti. Let the leader be born and is living in Haiti, but not leaders who we elect and they go to outside country to invest in those countries. But when it's time for election, they come back to their country to seduce their local people, to convince them, to bribe them with small amount of money so that they can elect them again. We don't want such thing. If we elect our leader, let's make sure the leader is from our country and the leader really invests in that country, but not to go to invest in outside country like the US, Canada, those Western countries. Our African leaders, if they are sick, they can't be go to the local hospital, to the hospital of their own country, but rather on they go into Indian hospital, they go to good hospital. Why are they doing those? Because they can't make our hospital to be good so that the hospital can be cater for their health. If they want education, you will find they have educated their children abroad but not in their own countries. And that's not a good thing. They really need to be fair. If it's an education, they should educate their children in the same country whereby they are leading. They should educate their children in the same country they are living or they are leading, where they were elected. So we should stop taking the citizen for fool. And our citizens the right time. When it's time for election, just make sure you elect for the right leader who will not disappoint us, who will not just do things to benefit his pocket. They will build roads because they know they will use those roads, the road everyone uses. But when you come to something like schools, hospital, they can't. So it's high time we'll be responsible and to unite, to be together, so that if we unite, we will have a stronger bond. So guys, if it was for the first time you're coming across my video, don't forget to like this video, subscribe and share. One love. Let's stay together and love one another.